All right, everybody, here we go. One more time, finishing up the notes for Chapter 6 in this video. We are starting off in your notes on Section 12, talking about payments now. And this is kind of getting more into kind of the accounting aspect. We're going to try to go through this as cleanly and without as much headache as we possibly can. Talking about cash and amortization. Cash license fees are fees that are paid, obviously, in cash without the use of barter. In other words, there's no trade that is going on here. This is a straight money out of the station pocket going to the pocket of the syndicator, cash license fee. Amortization, meanwhile, is an accounting principle where the total cost of the program is allocated as an operating budget expense on a regular basis. Usually it's going to be on a monthly basis, but it can also be done weekly or quarterly, generally monthly. And this is going to be as each episode's run is used. And that's the way that they will keep track of it in terms of the books on accounting, which kind of helps them to be able to see the assets and the liabilities that a television station has and the actual value of those things. If a station does not play off all of the episodes before the end of the contract, it may find itself with unamortized dollars that have to be expensed. In other words, the best way to explain this is that the value of shows that wind up not getting aired would wind up being written off in the books. Amortization schedules would include these two primary ones. There's a straight line amortization, which places an equal value on each run of each episode, frequently used to amortize first run shows. So let's say that you've got 10 episodes of a program that you're allowed to run, and the overall payment of the contract is $1 million. Then the straight line amortization will say that you are going to write off $100,000 each time you play a certain episode. So it makes each of those 10 episodes worth $100,000 to get you to the million. Straight line amortization. Declining value amortization says that each run of an episode is assigned a different value on the premise that the value of each episode diminishes each time it airs. This is frequently used to amortize off-network programs and feature films. So in this scenario, same deal. You've got 10 episodes in your contract. Contract's worth $1 million. You might decide in the accounting office that episode number 1 is worth a lot more than episode number 10. So you're going to say episode number 1 is worth $200,000. And then episode number 2 would wind up being worth maybe $150,000. And kind of going down in that sort of vein until episodes 9 and 10 are only worth a fraction of the overall contract. So it kind of takes more of a it kind of takes more into consideration the idea that there's a lot of investment that's paid up front whenever you're promoting something new on a television station, and that there's a lot of upfront costs associated with that. And the more that you own something, the less it actually costs to maintain the presence of that thing. Kind of like if you purchase a car and you're making payments on a car each month until you have that thing paid off. But while you're making payments on the car, maybe something happens to the car, your warranty doesn't cover it, so you have to pay for car repairs. So it actually costs you more to own the car as you're paying off the car, but then once the car is fully yours, then all you have to pay for is maintenance and repairs and that sort of thing, which takes a lot more out of your pocket month after month than it does when you're actually making payments on the vehicle. It's not quite an exact correlation, but you kind of get the idea. It's that you're spending a lot more on something when you first have it compared to near the end of the time that you own it. Now, we've talked about these terms here. Let's define them a little bit. Barter and cash plus barter. First, barter. Barter is when the station agrees to run national commercials sold by the syndicator in return for the rights to air a program. A typical straight barter deal might give half of the advertising time within a program to the syndicator. So let's take the 30-minute program as an example. 30-minute programs might have 22 minutes of content and 8 minutes of commercial time. Out of that 8 minutes of commercial time, under this 50-50 scenario, the syndicator would own 4 minutes of the advertising time, and the other 4 minutes would go to the television station for local advertising sales. Cash plus barter is a typical deal for a half-hour show in which a cash license fee plus 1 minute of commercial airtime is provided to the syndicator. So in this scenario, out of the 8 minutes of available commercial time, 1 minute is kept by the syndicator to run its commercials, and the remaining 7 minutes are provided to the television station. So this is a scenario where the television station can set its prices and sell commercial airtime and make its money, and then out of some of that money that it gains is going to be part of the payment, part of the payment that it owes for that show is going to come hopefully as a result of that revenue. Now, barter can reduce cash expenses for a station, but it also gives up possible local advertising revenue. As we kind of talked about, if it's a straight barter situation, you see that the syndicator maintains more of the advertising time within a show. Cash plus barter allows a television station to keep more of the advertising time and puts the risk a little bit more on the television station to sell the airtime and earn the revenue it's going to make, in hopes that the revenue it makes is going to outweigh whatever it still has to pay to the syndicator for the programming content. Barter and cash plus barter are used primarily for sale of first-run programs and the first syndication cycle of off-network programs because it's an effective way for syndicators to maximize revenues to cover expensive production costs. Syndicators also have a lot of money that they have on the line when something is new, when they're creating something new. The longer they hold on to something, the less it costs to maintain and provide that product. So generally, they're going to look for as many opportunities to make money on the front end as they possibly can. Syndicators will project a national rating for a program. In other words, they're making estimates on what they think how many people are going to be interested in watching their show. And then using a national cost per point, in other words, costs based on ratings, they're going to determine a rate for the advertising that it sells. Now, some syndicated programs are run twice each week. The combined ratings can then be added together to cum a higher rating, kind of like what we talked about in the chapter on cable programming, where if you have the exact same episode running rather short space within each other, whether it's twice in the same evening or twice over the course of a particular week, then because it's one particular episode of a show that ran, they can combine the numbers of whether you watch during airing number 1 or airing number 2. They'll add those numbers together to determine the cum rating, the cumulative rating. Now, cable and syndication. Cable stations may be willing to buy programs from syndicators looking for a national audience without selling to several local markets at prices higher than broadcast syndication, because the cable networks tend to have a larger national audience. They can pay the higher prices. Some cable stations strip off network shows and movies. Others buy failed network or syndicated programs at lower prices. And that's a way for them to be able to get newer content. Arrangements may be made for simultaneous or synchronous airings of programs on network, cable, or individual stations. So a good example of this would be the various incarnations of CSI. I have seen that running on syndicated broadcast television and also on various cable channels, as well as, of course, being made available on various online platforms. So it is possible, while the shows that are sold by syndicators to local television stations are market exclusive, that doesn't necessarily include an exclusivity from cable. Online distributors are poised to obtain revenue from any producer's content that can draw an audience. As of 10 years ago, Netflix began offering producers up to $100,000 per off-network episode just for the streaming rights. That doesn't preclude syndication to other networks. So in this case, the streaming services, whenever they pay per episode of a particular program, they are not necessarily getting exclusive rights compared to what happens over broadcast and cable. Many times it will be exclusive to their particular platform, but that's not always true either. There's an article in your notes that you may want to refer to if you'd like to get more information about how syndication works in the online environment and some of the logistics that happen there. The international marketplace. Now, the traditional pattern says that the syndication process is very similar to that of the domestic sales effort. The amounts of cash involved are generally going to be substantially less when we're talking about importing a program from elsewhere in the world to the United States, and vice versa, especially for a U.S. program to be distributed worldwide. We're not talking about as much money overall in this particular case. Now, in some cases, a program is created with American and international partners, and what they'll do is co-finance the production and distribution costs and then split the revenue between them. So if an American production company creates a show, they may then work with an overseas production company or syndicator to be able to invest in the program, market it to various outlets around the world, and share the costs of distribution and what they receive from the contracts there. Programs may be shot in one of the partner countries because A, national employment quotas. I know in Australia, in particular, there's contracts in which a certain amount of the programming that airs on Australian television has to be produced in Australia and has to have a certain amount of people that are Australian nationals working on the show. There's also the national pride aspect, that people like to watch content of their own, you know. If you're an Australian, you want to watch Australian content. If you're an American, you want to watch American content. Thirdly, to lower production costs. It can be cheaper to make programs in other countries. Let's face it, it's expensive to live in America. It's expensive to pay people in America. So it may be in the interest of a syndicator that is marketing a show around the world to produce that show in another country. Some countries regulate the percentage of a program schedule that must originate within that country. We've already talked about that to a certain extent. American dramas and movies do well in other countries. Comedies, not so much. Part of the reason for that is because humor tends to be cultural and geographic in nature. Something that is funny to an American may not necessarily be funny to a Brit or to an Aussie, and vice versa. If you've ever watched a British program and wondered how they come up with their brand of humor, if you don't understand what humor looks like from a British perspective, that's something that you might scratch your head at. It works for American humor going around the world as well. So by and large, comedies don't do well in the international marketplace unless there is a market for that particular brand of humor wherever you're distributing that content. The emerging pattern is this idea called format programming. A show's format is licensed to broadcasters in other countries so that local hosts can be used in each country. This is especially popular with game shows and reality television. There are in various countries around the world different versions of some of your favorite game shows, including Wheel of Fortune, The Price is Right, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Family Feud. They all have their own national versions of those shows. And we're also seeing certain reality shows take place on that as well. I know Big Brother in particular has various versions in various countries around the world. Now, what lies ahead for syndication? Well, innovative deal structuring, making deals more attractive to stations while finding new avenues for revenue, because as television viewership does slowly decline overall in favor of new media, there's more innovative partnerships that are happening, more creative ways for both sides to be able to get the most value for what they're spending and realize as much revenue as they can. Cost control, increased competition from cable and online, plus world economies and demands call for better efficiency, streamlining, and mutually beneficial use of all assets. Consortiums, co-production, and co-ventures, where we see much more sharing of costs and sharing of risks. So there's more of a buy-in on all sides on the belief of the value of their programming. Cable, internet, and mobile media, decisions must be made on how to sell content and how to protect copyrights. We're seeing the trend of how that is working more and more over the past couple years, as a lot of different production companies are now setting up their own online platforms, choosing to do that over top of going in on a consortium like a Hulu or a Netflix. Disney now having its own platform, HBO providing content. Increasing roles of reps, stations use reps more and station program directors less. Part of this is because of the vertical integration that is happening within the industry, where you have large companies that are owning television stations in multiple markets, and decisions are being made on a regional or national level more so than the local level. Increasing roles of networks. Networks are actively involved in the production of syndicated shows. We talked about that earlier in the chapter, where you could see a program produced by CBS actually airing on ABC or NBC. Sitcoms are still popular for syndication, as the half-hour time slots are still ones that a lot of local television stations are looking to fill at various times of the day. So that is still something that is sought after, especially some of the more popular sitcoms that are out there. Friends and Seinfeld, still very popular on broadcast television. And dramas, especially hour-long serials, those actually tend to not be as desirable. And there could be a lot of different reasons for that. It could be the time slots that are available. Dramas tend to do well in prime time, and most broadcast networks don't have prime time available, where they have a network affiliation that they're airing the network shows. So you don't see that happening as much. The half-hour shows tend to be those that syndicate a whole lot better. All right, so that does it. That's Chapter 6. You know the drill. Do the study questions, turn in the study questions and the notes. Check out the pre-class questionnaire on Blackboard before we get together to discuss this chapter. Bring your questions, bring your comments, bring your thoughts and your commentaries, your agreements, your disagreements, and let's have a vivid and wild discussion about syndication when we get together.